So, namaste. Today we'll talk about that Fill with Peace roadmap. And the first point I wanted to make is it's about daily rhythms because I don't think we can just realize this peace in one activity. So, if you're talking about, not being too activated, being lying low, being calm, etc., you cannot just do it in one activity. It has to be more of a daily rhythm. So let me start with a little question. How are you addressing the peace components during the day? Not just as one activity, but throughout the day. I think, Monica, you've given some thought to this.
Yeah, ma'am, from Anant, ma'am. Daksha started coloring. He'll sit peacefully and he will start coloring and he
Huh.
will start doing mandala and all that. So he finds it very, very regulating. So that simple activity like that can be so potent. I never knew that, ma'am.
You're bringing up a good point. I think um, when we see the different arts activities, so if you take the five tools, you have the movement and dance, music and rhythm. Then you have the storytelling, drama, arts, and crafts. What I'm finding even with Anant is the one that he can really just stay with for a long period of time is mandala. So it's the drawing, coloring. He can sit and draw for a long time. So even though he really needs the movement, he's not actually going to dance for 2 hours in a day, but he will sit and do mandala for an extended period of time. So I'm seeing that there is some sort of a uh, good mix of experiences. He certainly needs the dance. He's increasingly showing a lot of interest in music and, both singing and piano. And storytelling, he's been interested in since 2022. So there is a mix of experiences that works well. So a daily rhythm is about a healthy mix of experiences and what you do at different times during the day. So if you look at the peace roadmap, and I'm not going to share the screen, I'll just talk about it. I shared the roadmap today morning. I've kind of put the peace on a steps, right? So you have presence at the bottom, then engagement, then activation, then connection, and then finally enjoyment. So the way I'm seeing is even though theater arts for holistic development says enjoyment, and it's great, if you can enjoy experiences together, we learn more. That's great, but it doesn't always start there. Parents have stresses, children have stress. So it's really not always easy to reach enjoyment. And what I feel is the place to start is presence. And this is probably one of our most important discoveries since we started working with Ujjwal in 2022. So, regardless of what state anybody is in, he's always there with a very regulating presence, very calm, very, consistent, does the class in a very, very consistent and systematic way. So it's very predictable, very regulating. So, Suchita, I was telling you this idea that when you're doing, let's say you're trying to spend an hour with your child, try to have a predictable structure. This is what you see in the race class, and this is a TAHT, you know, uh, idea that you want to say, see, if you see the race class, you always start with a sloka and you always typically end with a chant. And in the middle, you may have a movement activity, a story, hasta activity, all these different things. But if you always make it a point to start with a sloka and end with the chant, you're now giving a predictable structure to that half an hour or 1 hour. So a key word for rhythms is predictability. And once we have that predictability, it is giving the child something to hang on to. And I think to me, the biggest variable, the most important variable, at least for Anand, is activation. Because if he's got sort of a low activation, not too wound up, learning happens. If you're really wound up, all falls apart. Or if you're too, the other extreme too, either you're too wound up or you're just too spaced out. So either of those things doesn't work well. So before I go further, I actually wanted to share a story. This is why I went back to the roadmap today. Yesterday, Anand had a piano exam, and he's done Trinity and all before. But in Rhythms College, they have this. They play a backing track, with the metronome, and so then they play a song, they have the backing track with it. And Anand had not really practiced much with it. We didn't know about their system as well. But for the last week, he's been trying to practice his piano with the backing track. When we go and sit and play, it's fine. We play when the room is empty. He just puts it on and plays. In class, because there are, many people in the group, he has to put the headphones and listen to the backing track and the piano, and the keyboard on the headphone, wear the headphone. Now, this is a bit too stimulating for him. So it's been kind of a difficult thing for him to manage because he's had to practice. It's the exam coming up, and he's motivated. He wants to do well. So he's been practicing for the last 3 4 days, but the stimulation is there. So, and I think Gitanjali, you asked this question before. What happens? I know that if I give him a certain activity, he's calm. Certain other activities, he may not be calm. But how does he learn what is good and what works for him? So I was very happy yesterday that because he knew that he had to go for one practice session by himself, and his sir had said, "Why don't you come and we'll practice before the exam?" And then he had the exam in the evening. So all these three things in one day. So from the morning, silence. So he's very deliberately being quiet the whole day because he knew that he has to handle all this stimulation. So I was very happy to see that he's beginning to, own these strategies and using them himself. Despite that, by the evening, he was getting very, because three of these intense sessions, because he was practicing for a long time too. So he was out of it in the evening. But he's beginning to realize because he starts getting a lot of thoughts when he's overstimulated. But now he's learned to ask, why am I getting thoughts? And so he's beginning to realize he's getting the sensory fatigue. And then he went and sat down with his mandala and he was coloring. And now we've actually discovered one new thing. So I said, Anand, do you feel like listening to music? He said, no, no, no. And we are realizing that when he's at a state when he doesn't want to listen to music, his sensory system is saying, give me a break. So it's whatever, the points or whatever in the exam, this is what I'm happy about. Because ultimately in life, you need to be able to figure out, I can handle this, I cannot handle this. And our children have, you know, probably very sensitive nervous systems. And other people don't necessarily know what works and what doesn't work for them. So I think since we started with Ujjwal, I think this is the biggest thing that has happened. Not the dance he has learned, not the music he has learned, just learning, what different things make him feel like and when he needs to take a break. So, Monica, you brought this up last time. Now that he's going and telling Ujjwal, I won't come to the group class. I don't want the group class. So, this is probably the most important learning for him. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the crash, right? You're going to end up with meltdowns, you know, all of those things is what's going to happen. Burnout, all those things will happen. So, to me, activation in peace is the single biggest variable. That's the one that we are always watching, number one. Two, you can't really look at activation only in one experience. So if you look at it yesterday, he knows that this listening to the backing track and the keyboard on a headphone is very difficult for him. And he has to do it for an hour, more than an hour. So he's realized himself that if he's just silent for a long time, it helps. And we went for a whole walk for 45 minutes and he was completely quiet. So he's beginning to learn, that if I need to handle these demands, I need to do this. and that I may still get into some trouble and I may need to then correct it. So once I come back, maybe I just lie down and, sit and do mandala. So that's what I call follow your inner rhythm. And so this brings us to introspection, right? Because to be able to do this, there has to be that introspective awareness, knowing how you're feeling, why you're feeling what you're feeling, and what you need to do. So this is where I think the daily rhythms become very important, because you can't just implement this, you can't just focus on this activation in one activity. I think you have to sort of look at it in terms of a daily rhythm. What I also mean by that is, let's say a child is going to school, right? Now you want to do these great things. You think, this race class works very well for your child. But if he's very stimulated and in a, wound up state after 4 hours or 5 hours of school, he's going to come back and he's not going to be able to engage that race class. So I think one of the things I'd like for people to do, and that's why I have the peace roadmap, is for people to really think about, how is your child's day? You know, how is the activation level flowing through the day, and what can be done about it? Because this, I think, is a very, very critical variable, because we've been playing shoots and ladders for like 20 plus years. And it's only now we are coming to a place where, he's really taking ownership of, we still have a ways to go, but it's beginning to register that I need to take ownership of this. So going back to, October 2022, when we sort of started on this path, we didn't know we started on this path, but when we started with Ujjwal, I think this is the path we started on. So we had the class, which is basically like the race class. That was a piece of it, just seeing Ujjwal with a very calm style, the imitation based learning, the repetition, the low demand, all of these things. So we learned a lot from that. In 2023, we went to Tiruvannamalai for the first time. And in 2024 is when he listened to the chants in Tiruvannamalai. So I think that's when, whatever we learned from Ujjwal's class shifted from a single lesson to what can you do with the daily rhythms. And now, in 2026, I think we're really emphasizing learning about your own limits, learning about what you can do at different times. Because I think that's the beginning of self advocacy, right? You kind of know, this is how much I can handle, this is what I can do, this is what I cannot do. So to me, if you keep on doing academic skills and other skills, but you don't even know how you're feeling and what you need to do to meet your needs, that's not very good. So that's where we are. And I'll just open this up for discussion, and then we'll get back to the roadmap again. Gitanjali, Monica, Bharti, Neetu, anybody? Suchita?
I have a question, ma'am. Like,
Yeah.
you said introspection. When Anand knows that he's having stress, like too much listening, too much auditory
Yes.
stimulates him. It's going crazy for him. So,
Yes.
but to reaching to that level where he understands that this is the stress and I need to break that pattern, how does that come? Daily rhythms you mentioned, but daily rhythms, how does that actually, if you can help me breaking the steps to understand how can I
Okay.
implement it? Like, I'll just give you an example where
Yeah.
I'm looking for implement this example. So like I told you, Ira is wonderful when she does one-on-one. All the activities, wonderful. The moment it comes a group, it's a lot of stimulation, external noise. So skates, one-on-one, we are doing morning practice one-on-one. She's doing wonderful. The moment she goes in the class, where five other kids are doing, in the park, there are other kids doing other things. She gets distracted and she does not know how to come back. So for Anand, you mentioned that he introspected that he probably needs a break. He knows how to come back to the real thing. He can take a break, certain amount of break, and then he knows how to come back to the real thing. So how shall I implement that, the
Okay.
daily rhythms thing?
So actually, I'll first take a step 20 years back, when we started doing, we were doing homeschooling. We were doing homeschooling from, I think, 2003, 2004. And in 2006, we started using Enki. And that's where I really started tuning into the power of daily rhythms. Beth Sutton who was the founder of Enki, was way ahead of her time, I think. She was talking about the daily rhythms, and she was talking about the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic system, sympathetic system, all of this she was talking about. And Anant was thriving in 2006. Why? Because we were homeschooling. It was a very low-key thing. We would get up in the morning, go for a walk. We would actually do some lesson or review on the walk. We'll come back. We had a big binder of movement activities. The one reason I champion, Ujjal's class and raise family immersion is because I know how important a curriculum is. I can't keep making up movement activities. So when Anant was in the Enki homeschooling thing, we had a curriculum. Just like Raise has a full activity bank, we had a big, binder of movement activities. So we'll come back, we'll do a movement activity. We had a full binder of stories for different age groups. We would do a story, then we would do artistic. They always had in Enki, they had artistic recall of the story. So we would do the artistic recall. Then we would, for lunch, Anant would do setting the table, which was again a part of the routine. Okay, now the morning work is done, and now, we are transitioning over to setting the table. And then we would take some rest in the afternoon. And then I used to use think blocks and folding and a lot of these kind of activities. So the whole day actually had a very healthy mix of activities, low stimulation, 2-3 times a week, a child from a neighboring family who was also homeschooling, they would come. So the point I'm getting to, Suchita, is they have to be able to calibrate their baseline. What I mean by that is, and this is why Anand really needed the Tiruvannamalai trip. Because once we went to Tiruvannamalai for 2 weeks, and not that everybody needs to go to Tiruvannamalai, you can do it in other ways. But what happened when we went to Tiruvannamalai? It is very peaceful, right? It's very quiet. The ashram is very peaceful. Girivalam is just long walk. So it's totally, the place is set up for a very calming rhythm. Now, when we have that, couple of days he had, he was getting very wound up. But because we know he's not in a group class, he's not having the stimulation of group dance, the only thing that's really happening is he's tired. So that's when he started tuning into, this is how I feel when I feel tired. And then we started finding out these subtle things that when he's tired, some days he will say, okay, I'll listen to chant. Some days he'll say, I don't want to listen to chant. So we've now started using that as an indicator. When he says he's not wanting to listen to chant, means he's really tired. And then he'll go to mandala or just lie down. So that whole process of, calibrating, being in tune with yourself cannot happen if you are, facing so many stimuli. There are children over there. So if you take the annual day example, right? There are bright lights, bright costumes, people talking everywhere, noise all over the place. You don't know what is troubling you, right? So it's very difficult to calibrate when you have so many different inputs. The more peaceful your day. So now, we have a very calming routine, right? We get up in the morning, we go to RMCL, we do a little bit of music, dance, we go on a big walk, we come back, all of this. So we have a very peaceful, we have mandala, all these things. So when we have a very peaceful baseline, then he goes to the piano class and listens to this. That's the one thing that is stimulating him. So he can pinpoint, this is what is causing the problem. Okay. So Neetu, I'll just come to your question in a few minutes. It's an important one. So the daily rhythm, which gives you predictability, but also gives you a softer baseline. So Monica, you had mentioned this when, Ujjwal had done this little experience in a session, that here are the guide variables, subtle things like
Yeah.
the soft voice. I'm realizing it is so important for Anant. So that soft voice, gentle movements, smile, predictable structure, inviting people to imitate, not putting demands. There are a whole bunch of variables, which is what we are trying to bring out. So these are the guide variables. Now, the reason Ujjal's class worked really well for Anant is because A, the guide variables were optimized for him. He also was in a big classroom with a lot of space, right? So when you have experiences in an environment like that, I think you're more in tune with yourself. Now, going back to the Enki days, what happened? It was all very beautifully optimized for him. But I think there was not enough of a challenge where we could say, okay, this is the thing that is causing a problem and how do we address it. We didn't get to that point. We just gave him a very, very, very soft and very, very regulated baseline. So and after a year or two, he felt very good and said he wanted to go to school. The moment he went to school, even though it was a small Waldorf school, things crashed. So I think what we need to think in terms of is providing this really, you know, ideally, how you do that, I don't know, but that piece as the fabric of the day, and then add in the stimulation, and then I think you learn what works and doesn't work. So literally, I think you have to be piece detectives as to what is going to cause problems. And the reason we were failing to fix it in Sanjay Nagar in Bangalore is so much stimulation. We don't know what is causing what. So when we went to Tiruvannamalai for 2 weeks, it really hit a reset, because we could, we were in this very quiet, calming place. And then if he was still getting a little worked up, we knew what was causing it. Oh, he's tired today because we walked in the Girivalam in the heat. So we were able to pinpoint the variables. So this is the problem, trying to pinpoint those variables, trying to help our children learn what is troubling them and why. And instead, we put them in a environment where they need compliance. So Kelly Mahler, who's done a lot of work on interoception, she talks about this. She keeps talking about why it should not be in a compliance-oriented environment, but a co-regulation oriented environment. And what I mean by that is, when Anand's in Ujjal's class, he's safe enough. He knows he can say, no, I won't do it. Or he'll say, no, I don't want. He'll go and tell him, I don't want to do dance today. Tell me a story. So he has to have that, comfort level to say, I'm not up to it today. And it was very funny. He went for piano practice and then went to Ujjal's class from there. And I can see he's trying to, really downshift his system, right? So he's participating, but not fully, because he knows he needs to conserve his energy for the piano class. So these are all things I think that are very important to learn, but I think they're also very difficult to learn if you're in a compliance-oriented environment from morning to evening. So that's my discovery, or at least our discovery over 20 plus years. And so I would love to hear from all of you, your questions, thoughts, and we'll go further. And Neetu will come back to your question in a couple of minutes. Any
You were
thoughts
saying
on?
has to be child-led environment in a systematic planned activity.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be child-led day, but in a systematic way, in some systematic, some planned activity,
Yeah.
but it has to be a child-led.
Actually, I wouldn't even say child-led, because I think, a lot of times, because if you look at, say, RDI versus, say, floor time, relationship development intervention, RDI is much more guide-led, right? The child doesn't really know what he needs or doesn't need. So if we go to Ujjal's class, he is in the driver's seat. He is not saying, Anant, you are in the lead, right? So he comes in there and he does what he needs to do. But then within that, he's observing what you're able to do or not able to do, and where you are and what you need, and a lot of it is his adjusting the guiding, right? And that co-regulation becomes very important, and that's more of a guide-led process. So to say that, okay, it looks like this is too much, I need to cut back on this. Anant, would you like to hear a story? Anant, would you just like to sit down and do it today? So a lot of it, that co-regulation has to actually be led by the guide, because the guide has to sort of notice that, okay, so they can observe, right? So he can see that, okay, he starts to dance and Anand is walking away and not wanting to dance and whatever. So at that point, he can say, Anant, looks like you're really not wanting to dance now. Would you like to sit down and do hastas? So I don't think it's a child-led process. I think it's a guide-led process, which is which gives a lot of emphasis to observation, noticing where the child is and adjusting. And that kind of co-regulation, then I think over time, there's a safety. So Anand feels comfortable saying, because Ujjwal has done it many times for him, now he'll say, I don't want to do the dance today. Tell me a story. So I don't know if that helps, Suchita.
Yeah, that makes sense. I got it. I exactly probably child-led. I chose the wrong word. System when I was saying
Yeah,
systematic planning by the mentor, and just
yeah,
observing what child
yeah.
wants, not pushing your wishes
Yes,
on the child. Like you have to do it
yes,
like this certain ways, because
yes,
even I realized when you too much to pushy to the child, like you have to do it. There's a time that the child shuts down. Okay, I don't want to do it at all.
yes,
So you have to take a lead, but you have to understand also how the child wants to do, how much he
yes,
wants to put in into that.
yes.
So yeah, I got it. Makes sense.
The other thing too is, if you, so this is where, Monica, I think this is where I still like the word Lilo, because, and Bharti also, I think, connected to that word. Because what happens is you say, okay, I'm starting to do, say, mandala within. If you don't push it too much, right? You're sitting down and both of you are coloring together, for example. I don't push. I don't say, Anant, no, you've colored here. Now you must color here. But observe. And interestingly, what I noticed was till about a couple of weeks ago, Anant was very interested in just coloring. He'll pick up whatever color he feels like and color some area of the mandala. Last few weeks, we have been folding. All of a sudden, by himself, he has shifted to more pattern-oriented coloring. Like he'll do one in orange, one in blue, one in orange, one in blue. How that shifted, I don't know. He was not coloring like this 2 weeks back, and I also didn't insist. Anand, why don't you follow a pattern? I didn't insist. Okay, if that's how he wants to explore, let him. So when that happens, there is more initiative. So I think it's a real dance as to where you guide and where you let them take the initiative. This is why I think, again, why Ujjwal's classes worked really well for Anand, because way back in 2022, we noticed that as soon as he'll start telling stories, Anand will be sitting and watching like this. So if you observe that, you can see the signs that he's showing more interest in storytelling than anything else. So slowly we started nudging that storytelling, which is great because it helped develop the language skills and presentation and so many other things. So I think, creating a structured experience, but not pushing and seeing where the child is going with it, because then that's where the initiative comes. And I think initiative is really important. And I think one of the parents was asking me in a conversation, then in a lot of the therapists, they just keep pushing them, do this, do this, do this. But that's not how life works, right? I have to be able to initiate and get going. So if it is done with structure, observation, and allowing the person to initiate, I think that creates a good learning process. So any thoughts on that? Okay. And if you're going back to peace, it keeps the activation low, right? So low demand means low activation, because you're come back to this combination of variables: the right place, well organized environment, calm regulated guide, low demand, soft voice, all of these variables, imitation based learning, not pushing the child, repetition, all of these things lower the activation. And then if this kind of a process can be carried throughout the day. So it's not just, our making it up. I think there are systems that work more like this. Waldorf is more like this. Montessori is more like this. Montessori has a beautifully organized environment and really has a nice structure for children to, take something, explore, put it away. There's a very beautiful process there. So I think the educational approaches that work with the child in this way, I think they probably work better for our children because they allow the child to feel what they're feeling and work with where they are. So I think the key point is sort of moving away from compliance and going more to co-regulation. And Neetu's point actually brings me back to the, there's the daily rhythm on one side, and there is a small experience on the other side. So this is, probably very familiar to Bharti and Monica and all. It's the regulation, challenge, reorganization. So whenever we're doing something, you establish a pattern. So let us say you're folding clothes or you're hanging up clothes. Create a simple regulatory pattern that, the child gives you the item of clothing and you hang it up. Child gives you item of clothing, you hang it up. So you create this regulatory pattern, and then as you keep doing it for many days, then slowly introduce a variation. And I mentioned this in the walking example. When we used to go for walks, it's the same route, pretty much the same thing, same time. But then we would introduce little variations. For example, I'd suddenly stop. So this is what Dr. Gutstein calls just noticeable differences. And I think that's a way to slowly uh, teach your child to accept variations and eventually enjoy novelty. So RCR is kind of, you know, for a small experience, but rhythms work the same way, right? You have a predictable flow in which, some novelty comes in. So ultimately, I think it's all balancing the structure and the novelty, having as much predictable structure as possible, and then allowing for some novelty to come. And that, tying it back to peace, when you have a lot of predictability, I think it lowers activation because your brain knows what to expect. So in the morning, Anant looks forward to going to RMCL and practicing the dance and music, right? Because now it's part of a daily rhythm. So that predictability, I think, is a huge variable for lowering activation. And what I feel is only when the activation is low and not very high are you able to enjoy. So if you ask me among all 5 piece variables, the one I have my eye on now most of the times is the activation. So we have about 5 minutes left. So I'll just leave it open and to what everyone has to say. Gitanjali, Monica, Bharti.
Ma'am, I understood that activating peace is throughout the day process, just like how we give sensory diet.
Yes.
But activating throughout the day, I can manage only till half day. The rest of the day, I'll get burst. How to manage this?
So I think that's
How to
why,
increase our battery?
yes. So there you come to the important point. I think you have to think of peace at 3 levels. Peace for ourselves, because we are under so much stress, right? So if we can't manage our activation, we can't manage anybody else's activation. So I would like to break down the piece into 3 pieces. First piece for ourselves. So if Ujjwal is able to guide with peace, it's because he spent 20 years in Ramana world and he's very, at peace himself, right?
Hmm.
So if we are there, we are all over the place, we are all anxious and doing whatever we are doing, it doesn't bother him. He's able to keep going, right? Not so for us. And also if it's your own child, oh, he's not doing this yet and he needs to do this, and all of that comes in. So I think investing in our own peace. And what I find is actually as you work with your child with the right experiences, it actually helps our own peace too. And Bharti picked up on this because Bharti, when I shared the chant, she said, I am going to listen to the chant first. So
Hmm.
a lot of these things like chants, mandala, all these things are equally calming for us. So I think we have to think in terms of it, our own being in that state of peace. Because if we are highly activated, our presence is also going to be like that, and our kids will pick it up right away. They will they will
Yes.
know. They will know. So
And they will pick it up that disturbance very fast. Not pace. Pace will come very slow, but this
it'll
is very
be
fast.
so I think we have to invest in our own peace, then only we can guide with peace. And this is also the reason I've been, trying to work with the raise family immersion class, because I'm just going by my personal experience, right? If you tell me on
Right.
top of everything else, now you have to work on peace, I can't add one more thing to my list, right? The easiest way for me is to be in a family immersion class with somebody who can do it, right? So if you are in Ujjal's class, you experience it, right? So for example, now they will sing the padigam, they'll do dance, they'll do all these kind of things. I'm watching that for an hour. I just replicate, right? So we go in the morning to RMCL. Anant will do the dance on his own. Adavas I'll do with him. Padigam we'll do together. So somebody is literally giving you that diet, right? And they're also showing you how to do it. That makes life easier, because that's why I invest so much time in race, because otherwise conceptually peace is not that hard, right? But to implement, we need things like that. We need activities like raise or folding, and that's why I started whole movement. Folding, mandala, all of these things are very, you know um, can bring peace as a family immersion thing. In fact, I was talking to Lakshmi, who was there, talking about mandala last week. So I've been nudging her to do mandala also as a family immersion experience. I said, why don't you try it with our group, and maybe you can eventually